Live in Corporate is brought to you by Doximity. Doximity is committed to fostering an inclusive and diverse work environment where differences are valued, practices are equitable, and employees experience a sense of belonging that allows them to bring their full, authentic selves daily. As medicine's largest network, there's an elevated level of responsibility to everything we do. We don't take that responsibility lightly and are committed to working towards a more equitable world inside and beyond our virtual office walls. So if you want to learn more about Doximity, go to your app store and type in DOXIMITY. Again, that's DOXIMITY.
What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Live in Corporate, and my goodness gracious, it has been over 4 years, almost 5 years, 4.5, right? Years since Living Corporate has been around. We launched this back in spring of 2018. And I remember Living Corporate when we were looking at, what do we really want this to be? Like, what's the vibe? Like, what's the brand? What's the purpose? What's the goal? And there were brands that we were looking at. As you know, we've had Ellen McGirt on with Fortune, and I talked about, and I told her to her face, virtually to her face. I told her on mic, I told her on the record that her profile and the work that she was doing to highlight Black male executive experience was an inspiration for Living Corporate. Another pod that we really enjoyed, I enjoyed quite a bit, and I continue to enjoy, is The Read. Just like the irreverence of it, at the same time, like the practical wisdom and entertainment that comes within that. From Crystal and Kid Fury, that was an inspiration. The Joe Budden podcast at the time was an inspiration. Desus and Mero was an inspiration because it was like low quality on like the audio side, like low budget, high quality, low budget, high quality content. So really enjoyed like that vibe of like, hey, it doesn't have to sound perfect and polished for you to get an audience or people to really listen to what you have to say. Really enjoyed that. I think about The Right Time with Bomani Jones. Like there's a bunch of different shows that I got pulled from to say, man, what's the vibe that I really want to create here? And there was a through line of just like authenticity, consistency, self-awareness, humor, with also like a high degree of intelligence, right? And so, those were shows that like really inspired me and really inspired like what Living Corporate started up to be and what Living Corporate continues to evolve into, right? Like those were and they continue to be inspirations. Then I thought about other brands that I really was inspired by, and like I was like, okay, this makes sense. Like, how do we continue this forward? So I thought about Black Enterprise, right? I thought about Essence, and I thought about Great Places to Work, which, we've had Michael C. Bush on. I talk about it all the time because it's one of my favorite interviews that we've ever had. But I also was really inspired by DiversityInc. DiversityInc, everyone knows like who and what DiversityInc is. Anytime there's a brand that wants to be like recognized for what they're doing to create more equitable places to work, they look at DiversityInc. Anytime there's an employee who wants to understand how equitable a company is, they engage DiversityInc. I'll say like as I've like transitioned from career to job, I've always looked and seen like, okay, what are the rankings? And I would say that while a lot of these rankings are kind of like pay to play, right? Like not a lot, but a good number. The two that stick out to me that are not that are Great Places to Work and DiversityInc. And so, I've been looking to and been interested in interviewing Carolynn Johnson, who's the CEO of DiversityInc for some years now. And it's just so funny how timing works out. This conversation happened just a couple of weeks ago, where I was introduced to Miss Johnson to interview her for the show. And I've just been really excited. I've been so excited about this conversation. Not just about her experience and journey as an executive and her matriculation to the office of CEO at Diversity Inc., but also the role that she plays and the heavy influence she has across Fortune 1000, Fortune 1,2,000 organizations, and organizations smaller than that, right, across the world, and really what it means to really respect and appreciate data, especially in a season where uncertainty continues to be the norm, where anxiety continues to be the norm, where the workplace is more politically charged and anxious than it has been. Some would argue that it has been ever. When you think about like the shifting charged political landscape, you think about how connected the worker is to everything else. We do not have like really siloed times anymore. You have employees who they're not just at work, like they're at all these other places too, because of the way that technology brings all the information to us. And so like, again, like the workplace is so different. Cultures are so different. Higher degrees of accountability and awareness, again, because of technology. So just a lot, right? Like I was so excited to have this conversation, and I cannot wait for y'all to hear it. Carolynn and I spoke for over an hour, and we're going to give y'all the whole conversation because she had bars for us. Okay, she had bars. She was ready. She was ready, and you'll even hear me say like I really appreciated her energy in this. So, with all that being said, we're going to go straight to the conversation. No episode of Workplace Democracy this week because we really want to make sure y'all hear this conversation with Carolynn. We'll make sure that y'all hear Workplace Democracy later this week, like on its own, because I don't want y'all to lose that either. I want to make sure that we get to this conversation. All right. We'll catch y'all next time.
When you're building a culture of belonging, every word counts. That's why Textio brings the world's most advanced language insights into your hiring and employer brand content. Our industry-leading approach to artificial intelligence and machine learning provides the tools needed to find more diverse candidates. In short, Textio builds more equitable workspaces, guiding businesses and writing more inclusive job posts. And we're building on that success by bringing even more products to the market for all people who share our belief that language matters. Words have power. And at Textio, we harness that power to increase the access and availability of value-driven work for everyone. Living Corporate is brought to you by Doximity. Doximity helps over 2 million medical professionals. We are the largest medical network that includes over 80% of physicians and over 50% of physician assistants and nurse practitioners. We don't take that responsibility lightly and committed to working towards a more equitable world inside and beyond our virtual office walls. If you want to learn more about Doximity, check out your app store at DOXIMITY. That's DOXIMITY. Carolynn, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
You know what? I'm doing well. Look, here's the thing. I don't really know where to begin because there's a lot I want to get into. Right?
Okay.
I'm really excited. What led you to joining Diversity Inc. and what can you share about your journey to taking the mantle of CEO of such a notable brand?
Oh, down memory lane we go. To start, what led me to becoming the marketing manager, because that was the first post I held at Diversity Inc., was my love of publishing, my love of effective, positive, helpful, impactful communications. So prior to working at Diversity Inc., I worked at a full-service marketing agency founded and run by a Black woman. And I loved the part of the relationship management working with publishers, because I got to select which organizations or which publications we would do ad buys on behalf of our clients in. And I based that on the integrity of their editorial coverage. And so when I was thinking about my next, I wanted to get into publishing. I wanted to be on the other side, not doing the buys, but creating the content, right? And so, of course, the publications that I wanted to work at, which I guess at that time, every young woman, I'm 42 now, but every young woman wanted to work at. So your Essence, your Ebony's, your Black Enterprise, right?
Yeah.
And rightfully so. They're like, you just don't have the experience. You've got a lot of people that are trying to get in there, not just Black. Mm-hmm. And I needed to cut my teeth somewhere else to prove that I was worthy, right? And so I went to work first at a .com. That was during the .com boom.
Yeah.
And I really understood how the content could drive the point of sale of products, right? So that was a great experience working at a B2B publishing organization. And then I was like, okay, but that's not what they told me. They told me that I needed print experience. So I got some publishing experience, and then I went to work at Advanced Star Communications in their pharmaceutical and science group. I'm just going to pause for effect there, because the titles that I worked on were applied clinical trials and pharmacogenomics and spectroscopy. And it's just like, wow, 5 different publishers for 7 different titles. But I got the experience with print publications that I needed. And I also got experience with managing our presence at trade shows and events. So that was like an added bonus. But my time at the full service marketing agency did expose me to a website, DiversityInc.com.
Yeah. And,
sometimes when you are a crisis communications professional, people call you the ambulance chaser of the corporate space. Because when people do something wrong or get in trouble or make a promise that they never intended to keep.
We're going to talk about it.
Never intended to keep. You're there and you're watching it. And so Diversity Inc. at the time had like different baloney meters, and they would look to see if a corporation made a promise to a nonprofit like the United Negro College Fund, or that's what it was called at the time, Thurgood Marshall College Fund, NAACP. If they did not come through on those promises, we, at the time, they would write about it. And so I kept them in my feed. I'm like, when we had our pitch meetings, I'm like, well, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. Yeah. And I'm proud to say that we actually got business because of that newsletter.
Yeah.
Fast forward after 9/11, I'm on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, which in 2003, January, you can imagine how difficult it was to get there. And I was reaching for an hors d'oeuvre at the same time a salesperson at Diversity Inc. was. And at that time, he told me that they had just launched a print magazine, and I almost passed out. I was like, this was meant to be.
Yeah.
He gave me his card. He connected me with Luke Visconti. And then he was one of the co-founders. And I interviewed him the next week, the top of the next week. He hired me that day. And February 3rd, 2023 will be 20 years that I have been with Diversity Inc.
Wow. It's interesting because there's a lot of intention that had to happen for you to really to be here where you are today. But at the same time, there was also just some really good chance that, you know what I mean? I think a lot of people, especially on the back end, not to say you're on the back end, but
I'm all over. It's okay.
20 years later, sometimes people will frame things because I built it like this and I did it like that. And the reality is some things just kind of happen as you're operating in your purpose. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of operating in your purpose, one thing that I can definitely acknowledge as I look back is we young African Americans, we don't sometimes get the career coaching and intention on helping us to form a direction that others do, right? And then that's also, it's not just based on race, it's also class, right? If you're, first generation college, your parents are going to want the best for you, but they may not know exactly how to communicate that and help you chart your course. But what I will say, whether it is race, whatever your dimension of diversity is, what doesn't change is when you show up. And if you prepare as best as you know how, good things will happen for you, even if that good thing is you learn something you didn't know before. And so it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you show up and you attempt to be prepared, that's how you manage the effective charting of your own course.
Amen. As we continue. You talked about 9/11. You talked about really like, again, like some fairly pivotal moments over the last couple of decades, and we continue to live and work in contentious times. The SCOTUS continues, like with the SCOTUS making decisions that impact the lives of everyday folks who also happen to work in an increasingly tenuous environment. And look, this is living corporate. This is not. So I'm gonna just say, right? We have the Supreme Court, taking away or rather attacking women's bodily autonomy. We have the GOP looking to push again, like taking away of certain freedoms. We have voting rights being undermined and attempted to be stripped away. We have queer and trans identities attempted to be erased by various types of legislation and behaviors. Again, there's a lot going on outside of the 9 to 5 that you clock in and clock out of your job. I'm curious, like, what's your perspective, like in this environment, on what executive leaders can be doing to create the best experiences for their employees?
Right. So it just occurred to me that while we like jumped on the screen and we started talking, I didn't say thank you for the invitation on behalf of myself and the team at DiversityInc. So let me just start. Let me just start there.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And I think with this question, there's some background that is necessary. So if you think about DiversityInc and the fact that since 2001, we have been the standard for measuring and validating major employer human capital outcomes. And what do I mean by human capital outcomes? It is not just to have a diverse meaning gender, ethnicity, orientation, disability, seen or unseen, and veteran status, right? Mm-hmm. So whatever the dimension of diversity is, and as far as human capital outcomes, it's not just enough to employ those people, but how are you developing those folks and then moving them to the top through your talent pipeline? So that's what I mean when I say human capital outcomes. And so if you think about it, we also measure the effectiveness of those talent programs that get people to the top of the organization or to the part of the organization where they believe they will be most effective. Because with, younger generations right now, everybody doesn't want to be a CEO. I certainly didn't want to be. Okay. So how are you helping people develop themselves so they'll get to the part of the organization where they'll be the most effective to help the organization remain competitive, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so the way that we do that is through a survey, and this is what we're most known for. The way we do that is through a survey that collects data, company submitted data. I want to be clear, this is not about employee sentiment. Yeah. How people feel is important, but how the policies, practices, and procedures that a company employs, that's the data that we collect. And we do it across 6 areas: human capital diversity metrics, leadership accountability, and those 2 categories are equally weighted because they're equally important. They are the bookends, if you want to describe it that way. Mm-hmm. We then look at talent development programs, and that's just for people who hear that but don't know what's really in the mix. That's your employee resource groups or employee networks or affinity groups. Different organizations call it different things. Yep. We look at high potential identification. And what that means is the company telling you that you are worth everything they have to give to develop you? And are they telling you that? And is the fairness of the high potential identification statistically proven? Mm-hmm. And then we also look at mentoring programs and sponsorship programs. So that's talent development. From there, we look at workplace practices, and that's everything HR related. So employee benefits, onboarding, diverse candidate slates. That's everything HR outside of talent development. Yeah. Then you have supplier diversity, and I think everybody knows what that is. And it's becoming a lot more important on the map and on the tongues of leaders now with this ESG, environmental, social, and governance movement. And then last but certainly not least is philanthropy. And that's a mix of understanding, not just based on corporate contributions, but what are your leaders doing to show up and support underrepresented nonprofits? And then also, how are you arming and engaging your workforce to be able to volunteer and get credit for it? So that's everything that we collect through the DiversityInc Top 50 survey. So again, just to kind of level set before I answer your question, that's DiversityInc. That's who we are. That's what we do.
Amen.
Okay?
Yes.
And so, got to get that little commercial in.
I appreciate it.
So surveys opening. Oh, no, I'm just playing. So, but regarding your question, with the Supreme Court, continuing to make decisions that impact the everyday lives of folks who also happen to work and an increasingly tenuous political environment. I think that's really where your question was going, right? And so throughout history, business leaders have found themselves at the intersection of excuse me, of tenuous political environments, right? Yes. And that's with real world impact. Now, he's no longer in a role, but Randall Stevenson, when he was the CEO of AT&T, in response to the murder of George Floyd, he was on CNBC and he talked about a lot. And I would encourage you and your listeners to listen to that interview. It's only like 5 minutes and 46 seconds, but it's a well spent 5 minutes and 46 seconds.
Okay.
And he talked about the fact that two things are happening. One, free markets cannot thrive when the people are in that are in like a social unrest, right? Unrest. That's very important because you can't feel good about what you're spending and what you're consuming when you don't feel valued, when you feel like you're under attack. So that's one. And then two, this was one of the most powerful things that I've heard, and he has said a lot of amazing things. But leaders have a responsibility to be involved in this conversation, because how can you know that the way you're going to treat somebody is like a fireable offense and they could sue you for it, but then know they're driving off of your corporate campus, right? And I'm paraphrasing, and know they're driving off your corporate campus and they're going to be treated the opposite way, and that it's okay for that to happen. The psychological safety, if you think about the rungs of Maslow's hierarchy, all the things that make us better employees, better contributors, are under attack when we leave work, whether it's virtual work or whether we're in the office. Those things are under attack. And that is the very reason why corporations need to have a voice on this topic. Because if your people are under attack, your return is under attack. And you have to understand that those two things go together.
It's a follow-up to that as I'm processing and receiving what you're saying, is even in this moment, like to your point, like investing in your people. I know diversity, and clearly DiversityInc by the various levers that it measures, engage, equity, inclusion, and just overall healthy employee experience for at organizations. Y'all clearly are valuing employees. However, we're seeing like in these seasons, we're seeing like continuous layoffs, like in the tech industry. We're seeing, and we also see like just like in these capitalistic structures, like every time stock price goes down and there's pressure to deliver, the first thing that are released are people. And so I'm curious, and in the framework of what you've spoken about and the levers that you pull to measure organizations for the assessments that DiversityInc is so globally known for, where in all does that play a part? Like, let's say if there's a brand and they're like, okay, they had an 11% layoff of their workforce and half of them were Black and brown. Like, where does that come into play with the ranking of an org?
Right. So I guess it would be helpful for folks to understand the organizations that trust us and then what their level of expertise is, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about the DiversityInc Top 50 list, there are other lists, right? So in 2018, we created the Hall of Fame. And the Hall of Fame is a group of companies that since 2012, they ranked number one on our list. And let me tell you, that is no small feat. That survey is a monster. Let me, issue an apology to all the people responsible for filling out the 2023 survey right now. Okay, we've moved over to Momentive's technology from Qualtrics. We're doing everything that we can to make it easier, but this work is not easy. So certainly a survey collecting data to determine who is doing it the best is not going to be easy, but it is worth it. And so when you think about those Hall of Fame companies, who's in that list? What organizations pull together data across multiple departments of multi-billion-dollar organizations and then had a legal officer and a senior executive review the submission saying that the information submitted is true and notarized a document to that effect? Well, you have Johnson & Johnson in the Hall of Fame. you have Marriott, you have Hilton, you have PricewaterhouseCoopers, EY, two audit firms, right? Those two organizations, and then KPMG is also on the top 50 list. Those organizations pretty much audit everybody's books, right?
Right.
And so they trust us as a third party validator of what they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You also have Kaiser Permanente, a major hospital and health insurer in the California area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Novartis Pharmaceuticals Corporation and Sodexo. Year after year, those organizations give us data and sit on edge to wait to see where they ranked. Many of them have ranked number one more than once.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the Hall of Fame. That's a group of 9 organizations. 2022, guess who was number one? Accenture. And I will pause because Jimmy Etheridge, the CEO, was on our stage in May, and he told me in front of an audience of many, Diversity Inc. is the external validator we need to understand if we're doing this work right.
I love that. No, that's incredible. And it's also, again, like it's the depth that you go into to validate, and to your point, like these are brands that other brands trust, and you're measuring them. So there's there's a lot of weight there.
And I just want to go on because I want to answer your question, because the data that we get from those organizations helps us to understand what best in class looks like. So there's the 9 Hall of Fame, there's 50 top 50, there's the top hospitals and health systems, top regional organizations, noteworthy, and then top utilities. That makes up 121 organizations we received data from and ranked. Now, mind you, we had 1,800 participants. Those are the organizations that performed and were recognized. But having said that, there's that tech question. And so when you think about this whole, philosophy or strategy of last in, first out, right? Unfortunately, you're seeing that with organizations that have never really had a strong opinion and a lot of effort toward DEI, right? The murder of George Floyd, and unfortunately we say that, but there were other things happening in that time. There was the murder of George Floyd and others. There was also an increase in hate crimes against individuals who appeared visually, who were visually being identified as Asian. It wasn't just the murder of George Floyd. That's what we like to say, but there were a lot of other things that were grounded in hate happening. And so when you think about, those organizations that just started doing this, right? They're the ones who were like, oh yeah, we care about diversity, because it was really marketing and PR. It wasn't business foundational. It wasn't of shared value of leadership that they were pushing down into the organization. Not like it is with the Diversity Inc. top 50 companies or other specialty list ranked companies.
I love that. And Diversity Inc. has this huge brand. Like, I meant to say at the top of this conversation, but Living Corporate, when we launched back in 2018, one of our inspirations was Diversity Inc. And so, I'm curious, you sit in this role as CEO. What are the things that you feel empowered to challenge and improve at Diversity Inc.?
So, I was named CEO in 2019. In 2016, Luke Visconti, who is presently the chairman and owner of Diversity Inc., and chairman, founder, and owner, in 2016, he stood on stage and told everybody his plans. 2010 is when he told me his plan, and we started working toward 2019. And I viewed it before as a challenge to get people to understand, but it's really not a challenge. For people who are interested and whose values are aligned because they do believe in their heart that all people are created equally, it is not a challenge. It is a gift. It is an opportunity to help them craft their voice on the topic, because they're doing the work internally. They just don't know how to communicate it externally, right?
Yeah.
So I thought it was going to be a challenge, but there are some extremely gracious leaders. I just mentioned Jimmy Etheridge, Michelle Buck at Hershey, Chris Nassetta at Hilton. Ronald Hanlon at State Street. State Street's on the DiversityInc top 50 list for the first time in 2022 after competing for 8 years. These leaders make this work worthwhile because they're using their influence for good, because now they have the data to be able to back it up when the naysayers on Wall Street or wherever else tell them you're wrong. That's anecdotal. No, we have data to back that up.
Yeah. I'm really curious, as we just talked about the landscape of DEI. Again, like, you've been in this space for some time. You're not new to any of this. I'd love to get your perspective on trends you're seeing and what you anticipate the space, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, will look like, over the next decade or so. Like, and I ask because as I look at, like, we've interviewed a lot of the brands and leaders and organizations that are on the DiversityInc list. And then of course we talk to other folks, and I don't know if diversity, equity, inclusion as its own domain is long for this world. I really think that it's going to have to figure out a new identity within the context of ESG. I'm curious, like, do you think DEI professionals understand the connection between one? Of course, want to get your perspective on the landscape, but as a follow-up, I would like to get your perspective on if you think DEI professionals understand the connection between DEI and corporate enterprise sustainability.
Right. So I think what we're experiencing right now is a shift in understanding that your expertise is not your dimension of diversity, right? And when you think about industries that have done it well for a very long time, I have to give it up to professional services, because what they would typically do is take a revenue generating partner, they would put them in that role, and then they rotate them out, because they understand how this topic managed effectively is business foundational, right? So when you have organizations, and it's also how they view it, and it's also what catapulted them to that moment. Oftentimes it'll be a lawsuit or the threat of a lawsuit, right? It'll be a global pandemic, right? It'll be the type of racism that you can't deny, and the outcome is murder. It's the thing that gets them to that place of understanding. And so you can just sit back and watch of a couple of things on the internet. You don't even have to talk to anybody. You can understand a company's position on this by, one, does the CEO have a CEO or US lead? Do they have a stance on this? Is there a statement on their website outside of the career section about the importance of diversity? What is the pedigree of the chief diversity officer, and where are they situated in the organization? Are they a direct report to the US lead? Are they under HR? And what is their title and peer relationship to other senior leaders in the organization, right? What type of relationships does that employer have with nonprofit organizations? What type of supplier diversity reputation does that organization have? And what do their employees say about them? Not the glass doors of the world, because Glassdoor to me sometimes seems to be a tool to beat up leaders when you don't agree with them. I'm just saying. And so there's a couple of things, like I said, that you can look to see. And like I said, you don't even have to have a conversation with someone to understand an organization's commitment to this topic, the leaders of the organization's commitment. And then last but certainly not least, what's their score with the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index? Do you have a relationship with Disability Are they certified with the National Minority Development Council? There are some very specific things that you can look for to see what an organization's real sentiment and real value of this topic is. And it's not diversity. I hate when we put fairness under diversity, because now diversity has become a bad word. This is about fairness and effective human capital management. That's what this is.
You just said something that, like, it made me think about another follow-up for you. So you talked about Glassdoor being this space where potentially to beat up on leaders. And I'll say this is like, I'm curious to get your perspective on the rise of other Glassdoor-like platforms that really seek to, based on what they state and how they market, is to give voice to the reality of lived experience at organizations. Like, I'm curious, like, what is your perspective on Glassdoor-like platforms? But there have been more that are more focused on like Black and brown historically marginalized experience. And then two, do you think that is a sustainable space for and if it has value in this whole like just employee experience space that we're in?
So, broadly, I cannot say negatively or positively the intent of why they stood that platform up. What I can provide here is advice on what to look for you to make that decision for yourself. And that is, and using Diversity Inc. as an example, we are a for-profit organization. We're not a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. But because this topic this is our passion, right? This is our passion and our purpose that we are able to go to work every day and live out. But how do we give back to that purpose, right? And the way that we give back is by making sure that we fund scholarships at colleges and universities that serve folks from underrepresented groups. So HSIs, HBCUs. HSI is a Hispanic serving institution. HBC, historically Black college university. And the reality of it is, we kind of do have to start saying that again, because a lot of people don't know what those two acronyms stand for.
Absolutely.
Where are we making sure that we are, through, shared marketing relationships, getting their message out there? Rainbow Push Wall Street Project, Haiku, Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, National Association of Asian American Journalists. Mm-hmm. How are we making sure that we partner with organizations that are really doing the groundwork to elevate the voices and talent of underrepresented groups? And so back to your question around these platforms, if they are not giving back to the groups that they are making money off of, I think you can then determine for yourself what their intent is and why they were stood up.
No, that's helpful. And I think I agree, like, to a very large extent. I guess I'm probably talking more so about like the startups, right? Like you're talking, the ones that are like the bootstrap startups that are looking to give voice to those experiences. I think like my challenge sometimes, Carolynn, transparently with you, is that it feels like, so I'm not about to like pick on Glassdoor, right? So this is not that. But mm-hmm. I'm curious about is like, I feel like there's a genuine class divide, or almost like, there's almost like this like worker employer divide and tension, right? So there's organizations and companies who are always going to want to be on lists, valid like Diversity Inc. or not like other brands, whether they pay or they're rightfully measured, and mm-hmm. to say, look how great we are. And there's going to be this other voice of like the populace of the worker, of the employee, who says, hey, like, I know they might be on this list, but like me and like 50 other people have had like really serious challenges over the last 4 years or the case. And so I guess it's not really a question for you. It's more just like a thought, is like, and I hope is, as we continue in this world of work, what I am going to continue to hope for is that there's spaces where historically marginalized voices and employees can speak truthfully and unreservedly about their experiences at organizations. We all have had conversations. Well, I have had several conversations. Before I take a job, I'll go on LinkedIn and find a Black person or find a, right? Hey, talk to me about what's really going on. Yeah, the interview was great. Yeah, I see what they got the article. Yeah, I see they got paid promotion on Forbes. Yeah, I see they did this. What is it really like working there? And, that's, and so I think it's important that there are spaces that democratize that experience and flatten it and make it accessible to folks. You know what I mean? Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. So I think in order to remind people of their agency, you have to constantly educate them, right? Mm-hmm. And so, when I think of startups, to your point, right? I think you have to make sure that you are putting, validated research in front of both audiences. So validated research in front of the employer to help them understand what's happening in the workforce with certain populations. But then you also have to do the same for the potential employee, right? So as long as you're making sure that you educate people on the, lookouts, or don't let this be your gotcha, right? I think you're on the right path. And that's, if I think about a recent experience, my own experience in 2018, I launched the Women of Color and Their Allies event, right? And it was not just a gathering of women of color once a year to kind of have our love fest. It was really intended to have employers talk about what they're doing, and what they acknowledge is an issue for women of color, and then to gather we already are pulling together the data through the DiversityInc Top 50 survey, but this was our first opportunity to match how the employees feel, how the allies feel with what the company actually has in place. Again, policies, practices, and procedures.
Amen.
This was our 5th year, right? So 2018 in person, 2019 in person, 2021 virtual. And just, sidebar, we should have been doing this virtually or as a hybrid event all along.
I'm trying to tell you. Let me
just say that.
Because it's 2022. There's computers everywhere. We should be able to have some flexibility somewhere. Come on.
Listen, but for this event, right, for people who couldn't travel, and not couldn't travel because of financial restrictions, family commitments, issues like, if they have a disability, they shouldn't be excluded because it can't be in the room, Right. And isn't that the issue? That's the underlying issue for everything. Yep. It shouldn't be excluded or not thought of because you're not in the room. Okay. But 2022, we're back in person, right? And to hear from participants saying things like, I was going to quit until I attended this event because I didn't know my employer even realized that these issues existed in our company. We got all these awards and all this other stuff, but a lot of that stuff kind of just feels like it's around us and we're not included. For me, that's when I knew that was probably one of the best decisions I made in 2018, to fight for this event, to get the visibility that it has now, and to make sure that the women that it is intended to help get the visibility, recognition, and acknowledgement that they have deserved all along.
We actually had, you may know, we actually had Michael C. Bush, who's the CEO of Great Place to Work on Living Corporate. This is about a year and a half ago, Carolyn. And we dug into the role.
Michael is dope. I like him a lot.
Yo, Michael is really dope. He is really dope.
Yeah.
But this is about Diversity Inc., Carolyn. We're not going to do that now. We're going to talk about what we can talk about.
No. But here's the thing, though. We can acknowledge when somebody is dope while we're still talking about why we are, too.
You know what? Come on now. I like that. You right. I like your energy. So we were talking about the role of the importance of data in DEI offices. From JP Morgan to Amazon and others, we've continued to see C-suite leaders resist organizational audits through the lens of equity and inclusion. Now again, if you can't tell, Living Corporate is more like, we're more like the voice of the worker, right? So, of the employee, of the individual, we center and amplify historically marginal voices at work. Is this a simple case of folks not wanting to be held accountable or risk legal exposure? Or is there something else there? Am I being too reductionist in my analysis of their resistance?
I think it would be unfair because I've, for a lot of these corporate leaders in like tech, I haven't met them. What I will tell you though is for other organizations who did not really value the importance of this data then, and now how they walk around with it in their back pocket, it really started from a proximate interaction. Okay. And I'm going to borrow from my founder's story. Luke was a Navy helicopter pilot. He got his commission with the Marines. And when it was time for him to move on to his next assignment, he was made to be a minority recruiter, right? And he was paired with a gentleman by the name of Tony Cato. and Tony Cato would listen to Martin Luther King speeches in the car when they were going from this place to that place. And Luke did not look at this topic the way he does now before he interacted with Tony and heard Tony's stories, but most importantly, viewed Tony as from a capabilities perspective, given their job function, and equal, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why it is so important for us to be senior leaders in these organizations. That is why it's so important for us to be in the heads of classrooms. That's what the PhD project of an organization I'm on the board of. That's why it's so important for proximate interactions to happen, because you need to be able to tie data with experiences. We're all human beings and we all are feeling individuals. And so if I can show you a capable person and people in the data, and then put you or pair you with somebody that can help you understand like that human feeling of capability, that's what they're missing. You know, if you think about Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook, it's great that she was, mind you, before, because it's no longer the case, but it's great that she was able to, be a woman at Facebook, the only for a very long time, right? The only for a very long time, even after all the books and everything and the leaning circles and all this other stuff, the only. But somebody left that organization appreciating differently the contribution that women have to tech, finance, and any other area where people don't typically think we deserve or can perform or be in. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's missing, that proximate interaction to accept that people that are different than you are capable. And that's what ESG is doing. And it's kind of funny because, people talk about, the nomenclature, multiculturalism, affirmative action, EEO, blah, 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 all this other stuff. But for ESG, Diversity Inc., again, for 21 years has been we've been the barometer of the S and the G, effectively managed. We have been, we always will be. Now the E, there are organizations that deal with the environmental piece. That's been happening for a really long time. Yes. But it's the S and the G that's what we do, and that's what we do well.
I'm excited about platforms such as Diversity Inc. that have, to share dopeness. I'll also say, the great place to work, because it's not just like capturing the data, right? Like we talked a little bit about, like, there's plenty of survey platforms, and if that's all you need to capture, but it's the work behind to then analyze and, in an intersectional way, various data sets that otherwise you may not have thought about. So there's a level of expertise and intentionality there that goes to say, okay, here's how we're going to cross stitch this data set with this, and then to uncover these actual stories. And then to go further and deeper and say, okay, in light of the data, here's where you stand on this, or here's where we have some additional questions and where further investigation needs to happen. So here's the thing. I will say, you talked about women and Sheryl Sandberg being the only one. It's like I can't tell you, Carolyn, how many times I've had conversations with organizations, and just intersecting race and gender is a big deal, let alone examining turnover rate by race, gender, generational cohort, geo, time and position, performance, benefits usage, all at the same time. Blows folks. I mean, I've yet to have a conversation with someone and they go, oh yeah, that's normal. Yeah, we do that every day. Like, every time there's eyebrow raising, there's surprise. And so my point, all that to say is, when you talk about we know the S and the G, I'm excited about organizations that have access to that sort of data and are leveraging, again, intersectional analysis for true insight. That's dope to me.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you should say that, because, I've been busy, right? And I don't just mean busy as in, running around and, being back in corporate boardrooms, but busy hiring. And so we have, over the past 18 months, really built out the data department, which is led by Dr. Chris Parker, and he's amazing. And Chris, I was talking with him, preparing for a meeting, and I said to him, I need you to let me know for 2022 how many participants gave us turnover data, right? And that's in the human capital diversity metrics section of the survey. And we look at turnover by management levels as well as overall workforce, by gender, by race, right? By gender, by race, and then where there are voluntary disclosures, because orientation, disability status, and veteran status, those are voluntary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you know, and then there's two types of turnover. There's voluntary, meaning they left on their own, and then involuntary, meaning they were terminated. 93% of the participants in the DiversityInc Top 50 competition gave us turnover data. And you want to know why they did it? Because no shade to the human resources information systems that are available today. The way we look at the data, their systems aren't able to allow them to look at the data that way.
That's not a surprise at all, Carolyn. I mean, and this is not an ad for Tableau or Power BI, but like a lot of people that I've talked to and worked with, like the way that the Living Corporate uses those tools, it's not really like that space is still as much as mature as you may assume it is. That data visualization and organizational assessment space is still very young. Like, and you would think like I used to think, even coming out of HR as an HR business partner, I just used to think that everyone could do that, or just and like HR departments are not. That's not the way it is.
But here's what's interesting. While the platforms, right? Because we use Tableau, Tableau, a Salesforce company. Salesforce owns everything. DocuSign,
everything,
Slack, Asana, just like it's everything. And mind you, we're an enterprise version of Salesforce. We invest a lot in technology. We depend on a lot of those applications heavily. The analysis for the DiversityInc Top 50 and the generation of those benchmarking reports, we use Tableau for that. Now, mind you, there's a lot of technology on the way to getting it ready for Tableau, but that's where it all ends up, right? Yeah,
I know what you mean. You got it, because some people use R and Python and stuff like that to cleanse those.
Exactly.
I know.
So I know you know. So what I think is interesting about that is the visualization is fine. It is knowing what things that you need to look for to visualize, what you need to connect that is significant and tells the story through the visualization. That's the thing. And DiversityInc has no corporate debt, no outside investors, because we will not have anybody tell us what to write or what to point out. And so, I'll give you a perfect example. If you have a group of, if there is fairness in your high potential identification, meaning for management, the ratios are as close to 1 as possible. So the ratios for management versus high potential identification for women is 1 to 1 or close to it. There's fairness there. So how sad would it be if you've done the work to make sure that there's fairness in your high potential identification program, but then you don't make sure that those people are mentored or sponsored? But if you don't know to connect those things to see how it's working out, then that is a recipe for regrettable loss, and it is unnecessary. But if your systems don't tell you and are not structured to make sure that those things line up, guess what? The American Center for Progress, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, said it's a 210% replacement cost. Direct replacement cost. That's not indirect. Lost productivity, lack of communication. So if you could just make sure that those small things are properly linked and you are looking at them often enough, a certain body, we typically look at the Executive Diversity Council, that will at least monthly, be tracking these things, then guess what? What are you going to do? And that's the power of organizations like DiversityInc. We are here to make sure that you can see what's happening with your workforce in a way that legal may not typically have allowed you to do in the past, or that the system that you're on or migrating to is not ready yet to be able to help you do.
First of all, we can keep going, but I'm going to honor this block that we have, because I know you're going to come back on Living Corporate. So I'm going to ask this last question, and I'm going to give you some time back.
Okay, well, let me get to my notes. Which question is it?
Carolyn!
What?
It's okay.
I'm not just doing this off the hip. I'm good. I'm just saying.
This is the last one. Oh my gosh, what a great day. So oftentimes when we talk DEI, we go to, the first things we do, and some of this I believe is racism and misogyny and other isms, is that every time we think about like non-white folks and like, because DEI, immediately you start thinking non-white people, but it's like, okay, well, let's train and mentor them. There's a certain level of like presumptive, incompetence we take. But anyway, like we actually had Michelle Gaston Williams on years ago. This was back when she was actually still at Accenture. And she dropped a bar, and it went something like, Black professionals are over-mentored and under-sponsored. What if, first, like, what's your reaction just to like that statement?
She's right. And let's just talk about Michelle for a moment. Michelle, in 2018, she was the first lunch keynote that DiversityInc ever had for the Women of Color and Allies event. We purchased copies of her book, Climb, and we made sure that every attendee had it. Michelle's comment was not just based on a feeling, it was based on experience. Michelle started at Johnson & Johnson. From Johnson & Johnson, she went to Novartis. Then from Novartis, she went to Credit Suisse, then Accenture, and now she's at BlackRock. Right? And so what she said was not, again, anecdotal or just a feeling. It was grounded in data, right? And while Michelle has been doing this work for a very long time, unfortunately, it took a partnership between McKinsey and Lean In to document that experience for people to believe it. Okay?
Yeah.
And so that is why this proximate, just going back to what we talked about before, these proximate interactions are important, because if not for a Michelle Gadsden Williams or a Wanda Hope at Johnson & Johnson right now, who is the global inclusion and diversity officer, if not for Yolanda Friend, who is right now the North America lead for DEI at Accenture, if not for these women, if not for Shannon Schuyler at PricewaterhouseCoopers, or Leslie Patterson at EY, responsible for DEI in the US, or Karen Twarnight, responsible for DEI globally. If not for these women, and mind you, they're not just Black women that I named, they're Black women and white women, okay? Or Nelly Barrero at Accenture, right? Who's Latina. If not for these women and those proximate interactions, McKinsey or Lean In wouldn't have seen value in even going down the road to find that data, to then make sure it was valid, to report it out. And so Michelle is absolutely right. And I am sure there's more she could have said on that topic. Y'all could have been talking, you from the time she was on here with you to now, you could still be having that conversation, because it is true. And the data proves it.
Yeah. I mean, I fully appreciate the concept of, upskilling and training and mentoring. And like, I'm never going to like knock any of that. But for me, like, I don't think that historically marginalized folks don't know how to operate. Like, I don't think that education is like the biggest gap. I think it's because we're rarely and historically have not been empowered to make those decisions and move. Like, I'm curious, like, when you think about like, and Living Corporate has explored and had several guests on to talk about the relationship between diversity, equity, inclusion, and power. And I'm curious, like, where does the concept of power redistribution fit within your ethic as a leader, especially when you think about the work that DiversityInc does and like creating inclusive and equitable work, like supporting or measuring those things? Like, where does that fit into the work that you do, and how you see the space?
All right. So, but before we go on to that, just to kind of stick to this whole concept of mentoring and sponsorship, right? Mentoring can be something an app does, right? Sponsorship is a decision a leader makes, and they make that decision because of interaction and proximity. And so going back to Michelle's statement that people are over mentored and under sponsored, if you think about some of the questions in our survey, we ask, for your level 1 and 2s, and the way in which we allow organizations to kind of normalize their management to fit in our levels. Level 1 is the US lead and his or her direct reports. Level 2 are their direct reports, 3 their direct reports, and in 2017 we added level 4, understanding that that's the bench if you are a build type of organization and not a buy. Build meaning you have your leaders come up in the organization. Buy, you bring talent in from the outside, right? And so we ask, are your levels 1 and 2 required to participate in mentoring and sponsorship programs? If they're not, then there are there's 3 very important next places that you look to understand the impact of that decision or lack thereof, that engagement. So it is absolutely, again, the data shows it. When you see people being sponsored, you see people being promoted. When you don't see people being sponsored, you don't see the level of promotions that you should, that are fair based on workforce makeup, right?
Yep.
And engagement. So I just wanted to share that with you.
So you're right, because there's, to Miss Gaston Williams quote, there's over mentorship and there's under sponsoring. So and sponsorship to me really is an exercise in power sharing, right? It's me, power. Right? It's me as this senior person or person with access or person with network sharing that, or maybe even conceding it to someone else. And so, and that's the piece of, and you answered the question there as well, but it's the fact that that's what needs to happen. And when we talk about diversity, it's oftentimes, hey, look at this non-white person that we're tokenizing and standing up as a fixture of whatever, and not so much hey, we've actually conceded space to this person or this group, and we're empowering them to make the decisions in this organization.
Yeah. So just on the whole topic of sponsorship, I think, Carla Harris really started to help us focus. Carla Harris, Morgan Stanley, she really started to help us focus, not just on definitions, but on outcomes, right? And then if you think about, Tashonda Brown Duckett, she was at Chase. Now she's the CEO of TIAA. And so if you think about it, we have some real examples to point to of when sponsorship goes right, okay? And so look for those, and don't just listen to the stories, but look at the organizations that they came from and then where they went to, because they understood the power of it. And then look at the shape of those organizations that they went to and how strong they are when it comes to these topics that worked out really well for them to even take on that seat. I think that the kind of following and mapping to understand trends, that's what we have to do effectively if we're going to win.
Carolynn, we could go on all day. I told you I was going to honor your time. Thank you so much for being a guest on Living Corporate. We consider you a friend of the show. We hope to have you back, and we'll talk to you soon.
I'm here for it.
And we're back. Thank you so much to Carolynn Johnson of Diversity Inc. Thank you so much for all of your leadership, your courage, your candor, your dedication to transparency, accountability, and awareness. I'm excited about the future of this space, the future of this work. I'm excited about the role that brands like Diversity Inc. play to create accountability and awareness and voice to employees, and also that puts spotlights on the brands that are doing the right things. I'll also say that, the future is not one that gives backpats to corporations. The future is one that I believe will continue to center and amplify the worker. That will center and amplify the Black and brown, historically marginalized worker. I do not believe that we're seeing some flash in the pan. I believe the trend will continue, that individual voices will continue to organize and operate as a collective to demand equitable treatment. And it is imperative that organizations respect this trend or that they perish, because there's more workers than there are corporations. And irrespective of what brands may like to say or think, brands need workers. They need talent to survive. So I'm excited about the future of data and employee experience. I'm excited about the brands that choose to lean in to that space and that work. And I'm excited about living corporate. Make sure y'all check us out everywhere you listen to podcasts. Make sure you check us out on living-corporate.com. Create a profile. You can listen to this conversation and many more. And give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. All right. Catch y'all next time. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.